I died on a Tuesday. The irony wasn't lost on me, even as I felt my heart give its final, pathetic flutter. Tuesday, the most unremarkable day of the week. The day that meant nothing to anyone, just like I had meant nothing to anyone by the end. The hospital room was empty except for the nurse who would find me in about 3 minutes. I knew because I'd been counting. Counting was all I had left. Michael wasn't coming. He was in Singapore with our children, his children now, according to the custody ruling, and his new wife. The woman who used to be my best friend. The woman who had smiled at our wedding and told me I was the luckiest girl in the world. She was right, in a way. I had been lucky. Lucky to be blind enough not to see what was happening until it was too late. My chest felt like someone had filled it with cement. The heart attack had started 2 hours ago, but I hadn't called for help immediately. What was the point? The medical bills from my last hospitalization had bankrupted me. Michael had made sure of that when he drained our joint accounts the day before he filed for divorce. His lawyer, his mother's lawyer really, had argued that I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. The judge had believed every word. The room was spinning now. I thought about Emma and Lucas. 7 and 5. Old enough to remember me, young enough to forget. Michael would make sure they forgot. He was good at erasing things. He'd erased our marriage, our promises, 12 years of my life. He'd erased my career by sabotaging my reputation at the firm where we both worked. He'd erased my credibility by painting me as a hysterical, paranoid wife who couldn't accept that our marriage had simply run its course. No one had believed me when I said he'd been planning this for years, that he and Jessica had been sleeping together since before Lucas was born, that his mother had helped him hide assets in overseas accounts, that he'd deliberately isolated me from my family and friends, then used that isolation as proof that I was unstable. The darkness was coming now, soft and insistent. I thought I might fight it, but I was so tired. I'd been tired for 3 years, ever since the divorce proceedings started. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Tired of watching my children grow up in photographs on social media, their smiles getting wider in direct proportion to how rarely I appeared in their lives. Michael had won. He'd gotten everything. The house, the money, the kids, the life we'd built together. And I'd gotten this. A county hospital room that smelled like bleach and defeat, and a debt that would outlive me. My last thought, as the darkness swallowed me whole, was that I hoped Emma would remember that I loved her, that I'd fought for her, that I'd never stopped. The light hit me like a slap. I gasped, my body jackknifing upward, hands grasping at air. My heart was pounding, but not dying. Not dying at all. It felt strong, young, almost violent in its insistence on beating. Mrs. Chen? Mrs. Chen, are you all right? I turned my head and the world tilted. I was in an exam room, a private one, with soft gray walls and abstract art that probably cost more than my last month's rent. A doctor stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her face creased with concern. Yes, I managed. My voice sounded wrong, higher, stronger. You were nodding off during the consultation, she said, smiling. I know pregnancy can be exhausting, but we're almost done. Just need to confirm the due date for your second child. Pregnancy, second child. The words hit me like physical blows. I looked down at my body, my young body, my unravaged body, and saw the small, neat swell of a belly under a designer maternity dress I'd forgotten I'd ever owned. I need a moment, I whispered. The doctor nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't possibly understand. Of course, I'll give you some privacy. The bathroom is just through there if you need it. She left. I sat there staring at my hands. No wedding ring. I hadn't started wearing it to doctor's appointments yet because of the swelling, but I knew it was in my purse. A 3-carat diamond that Michael's mother had picked out because family tradition and the Chen name and all the other reasons that had sounded reasonable at the time. I made myself stand, made myself walk to the bathroom, made myself look in the mirror. 29 years old. That's what looked back at me. 29, pregnant with Lucas, married to Michael for 3 years, still working at Chen & Associates as a junior partner, still believing that hard work and loyalty meant something. Still stupid. No, not stupid, not this time. I gripped the edge of the sink, my mind racing. If this was real, if I had somehow impossibly been sent back, then I knew everything. I knew about Jessica. I knew about the offshore accounts. I knew about Michael's plan to wait until I was most vulnerable, most dependent, and then destroy me systematically and completely. I knew about the custody battle, the financial abuse, the way his mother would coach the children to call Jessica mommy while I was still fighting for supervised visitation. I knew how the story ended, but I also knew how it began. The appointment was on a Thursday in March. Lucas would be born in June. In 8 months, I would return to work, and Michael would suggest that Jessica, wonderful, helpful Jessica who had just moved back to the city, could help with childcare. In a year, I would find suggestive texts on his phone, and he would gaslight me into believing I was paranoid. In 18 months, I would catch them together, and he would cry and beg for forgiveness, and I would stay because of the children. In 3 years, he would file for divorce and take everything. Unless I stopped him. I looked at my reflection, young, successful, educated, pregnant with my second child. And I felt something I hadn't felt in my first life's final years. Rage. Pure, clean, crystallizing rage. Michael thought he was smart. His mother thought she was untouchable. Jessica thought she was clever. They had no idea what they'd created. As I walked out of that doctor's office with a smile on my face and murder in my heart. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience. In my first life, I'd been impulsive, emotional, reactive. I'd played every hand exactly the way Michael had predicted. I'd cried when he wanted me to cry, fought when he wanted me to fight, crumbled when he needed me weak. Not this time. This time, I would be exactly what he expected. The perfect wife, the devoted mother, the woman who loved him too much to see what was right in front of her face. And while I played that role, I would dismantle his life piece by piece. I started that very night. Michael came home from the office late, smelling like scotch and someone else's perfume, and I kissed him at the door like I always had, like I always would have in that other life. "How was the appointment?" he asked, loosening his tie. He'd put on weight since our wedding, but he still carried himself like the golden boy he'd always been. Boarding school, Ivy League, corner office by 30. The world had always bent itself around Michael Chen. "Perfect," I said, taking his briefcase. "Dr. Morrison says the baby is healthy. Due date is June 15th. Good, good." He was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through emails. In my first life, this had hurt. His disinterest, his distance. Now I saw it for what it was. Opportunity. "I was thinking," I said, keeping my voice light. "Maybe we should update our estate planning. With 2 children, we should make sure everything is in order. Just in case." He glanced up, mildly surprised. "That's very practical of you." "Well, I am a lawyer," I said with a smile, "even if I'm on maternity leave soon." "Use Morrison and Associates," he said. "They handle all of Chen and Associates' estate work. I'll set up the appointment." Perfect. Morrison and Associates, run by his mother's golfing partner. In my first life, I'd signed whatever they put in front of me, trusting that Michael had our best interests at heart. I'd had no idea that the documents were structured to leave me with nothing in the event of a divorce. That the trust funds for the children were controlled entirely by Michael and his mother. That I'd signed away my rights to our primary residence, our joint accounts, everything. "Actually," I said carefully, "I'd prefer to use someone independent, just for my own peace of mind. You know how emotional I get about the kids." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Morrisons are family friends." "I know, and I'm sure they're wonderful, but I'd feel better with someone who doesn't know us personally. Someone objective." I put my hand on his arm. "Please. It would make me feel so much better." He studied me for a moment, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding if this was worth fighting about, if it would reveal too much too soon. "Fine," he said finally, "but make it quick. I don't want this dragging on." "Of course," I kissed his cheek. "I'll take care of everything." I did. I contacted 3 different estate lawyers, legitimate ones, with no connection to the Chen family. I had them draw up documents that were fair, equitable, and would hold up under any scrutiny. I made sure everything was divided 50-50 with independent trustees for the children's accounts. And I had every single page reviewed by a fourth lawyer before I signed. Michael signed without reading. He always did. He trusted that the world would arrange itself in his favor because it always had. Lucas was born on a humid Tuesday in June, 8 pounds and screaming. I held him in my arms and felt the weight of 2 lifetimes settle onto my shoulders. In my first life, I'd been overwhelmed, exhausted, touched out, and desperate. Michael had been absent, always working, always busy, leaving me to drown in diapers and sleepless nights while he built his career. This time, I'd hired a night nurse. I'd arranged for a postpartum doula. I'd enrolled Emma in an excellent preschool with extended hours. And when Michael complained about the cost, I reminded him, sweetly, gently, that I would be returning to work in 3 months and would need to be well rested. "I thought you might take a full year," he said, frowning, "like you did with Emma. And fall behind at the firm? You know how competitive it is." I adjusted Lucas in my arms, keeping my voice light. "Besides, we need my income. Kids are expensive." He didn't like it, but he couldn't argue. Not without revealing that he'd planned for me to be isolated, dependent, easy to dispose of when the time came. I went back to work that September, and I was relentless. I took every case I could handle, billed every hour, brought in new clients. I made myself indispensable to the firm in a way I'd never managed in my first life when I'd been too tired, too depressed, too focused on trying to save a marriage that was already dead. And I started documenting everything. Every late night, Michael came home smelling like someone else. Every unexplained charge on the credit cards. Every time he told me he was working late and I drove past his office to find it dark. I kept a journal, backed up in 3 different cloud accounts that he didn't know about. I took screenshots of texts. I recorded conversations. I built a case the way I'd been trained to build a case. Methodically, thoroughly, and with devastating attention to detail. Jessica showed up exactly when I knew she would, 8 months after Lucas was born. She'd just moved back to the city after her terrible breakup and didn't know anyone, and would love to reconnect. I welcomed her with open arms. I invited her to dinners. I asked her to babysit. I watched as she and Michael exchanged looks they thought I didn't notice. And I documented all of it. The affair started in March, right on schedule. I knew because I'd installed tracking software on Michael's phone, disguised as a family safety app. I knew where he was, who he texted, what he searched for online. I knew about the hotel rooms, the expensive gifts, the burner phone he thought was secret. I knew everything, and I smiled and played the fool. "You seem distant lately," I said one night, 6 months into the affair. We were in bed, the space between us a canyon. "Is everything okay?" "Just work stress," he said, not looking at me. "We should go to counseling," I suggested. "I've been reading about how important it is to nurture a marriage, especially with small children." He actually laughed. "Counseling is for people who have problems." "Don't we have problems?" I made my voice small, uncertain. The voice of the woman I'd been in my first life. "You have problems," he said, and turned off the light. "I'm fine." I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, and thought about what was coming. In my first life, he'd filed for divorce when Emma was 8 and Lucas was 6. He'd waited until I was most vulnerable, most dependent on the life we'd built. He'd timed it perfectly to cause maximum damage. This time, I wouldn't wait. This time, I would choose the moment. But first, I needed to set the trap. The key to a good legal strategy is understanding your opponent's weaknesses. Michael had 3: his arrogance, his mother, and his greed. His arrogance made him sloppy. He didn't think I was smart enough to catch him, so he didn't bother hiding his tracks particularly well. The affair was obvious to anyone who cared to look. The financial improprieties at the firm, the creative accounting, the client funds moved through shell corporations, were all documented in emails he saved to our shared family computer. His mother, Eleanor Chen, was his second weakness. She controlled him absolutely, and she hated me with a passion that was almost impressive. In my first life, she'd been the architect of my destruction, coaching Michael on how to manipulate custody evaluations, recommending lawyers who would bury me in paperwork. using her social connections to freeze me out of every network that might have helped me. Eleanor had one vulnerability: her reputation. The Chen name meant everything to her. She sat on charity boards, hosted fundraisers, presented herself as the epitome of old money respectability. The idea that her son might be anything less than perfect was unthinkable. And greed. Michael's greed was the third leg of the stool. He didn't just want to leave me, he wanted to win. He wanted everything: the house, the kids, the money, the moral high ground. In his mind, he deserved it all because he was a Chen, and I was just the girl from nowhere who'd gotten lucky when he married me. So I gave him exactly what he wanted. I made myself the perfect target. I started making mistakes at work. Nothing major, missing a deadline here, forgetting a meeting there. Enough that my senior partner called me in for a concerned chat about whether I was managing okay with two small children. I cried in his office and said it was so hard, so overwhelming, that maybe I needed to scale back my hours. I started seeing a therapist and I made sure Michael knew about it. Just some postpartum anxiety, I told him. Dr. Williams says it's very common. I left the therapy appointment cards on the kitchen counter where he'd find them, where he'd add them to his mental file of evidence that I was unstable. I withdrew from our social circle bit by bit, declined invitations, stopped hosting dinners, made excuses about being tired, being overwhelmed, needing to focus on the kids. I let Eleanor tell her friends that I was struggling and accepted her offers to take the children for weekends, knowing she was using the time to poison them against me. And all the while, I was building my real life in secret. I'd started my own firm. Well, not officially. On paper, I was just consulting part-time for a few high-net-worth clients who valued discretion. But I was making connections, building a reputation, socking away money in accounts Michael didn't know about. I'd learned my lesson about joint finances. I'd also been building evidence, not just of the affair. That was almost too easy. I had evidence of Michael's financial crimes at Chen and Associates. Evidence of his mother's illegal use of client funds for personal expenses. Evidence that the Chen family empire was built on fraud and held together by Eleanor's ruthless willingness to destroy anyone who threatened it. I had enough to bury them both, but I needed one more thing. I needed Michael to do something so egregious, so publicly indefensible, that even Eleanor's connections couldn't save him. I needed him to take the children out of the country. The plan came together over 18 months of careful manipulation. It started with planting the idea that the children would benefit from international exposure. I mentioned it casually at first: articles I'd read about bilingual education, programs for young children in Europe, how important it was in our global economy. Michael, predictably, loved the idea. It fit his self-image as a sophisticated worldly father. And it gave him something to discuss with Jessica, who had studied abroad in Paris and never shut up about it. I started taking the kids to Mandarin lessons, even though Michael's family spoke Cantonese. For business, I said. China is the future. Eleanor approved, of course. Anything that advanced the Chen legacy was worth doing. Then I suggested a family trip to Singapore. Your cousin just moved there for work, right? We should visit. It would be good for the kids to see that side of the family. Michael hesitated. Singapore was expensive, and despite his show of wealth, he was cash poor. The lifestyle he and Jessica were maintaining required both his salary and creative borrowing from client accounts. But he couldn't say no without revealing the precarious state of his finances. Maybe next year, he said. Or, I said carefully, maybe you could go with the kids this summer. A father-children trip? I have that trial in July, and it would be good for them to bond with you. I watched the idea take root. A trip without me. A chance to show the kids how much better life could be with just him and, eventually, Jessica. A trial run for the custody arrangement he was already planning. I'll think about it, he said. I knew he'd do more than think. I knew he'd plan. And I knew exactly what that plan would look like because I'd lived through it before. In my first life, Michael had taken the kids to Singapore for vacation and simply never come back. By the time I'd realized what was happening, he'd already enrolled them in international schools, established residency, and filed for custody in a jurisdiction where his mother's money and connections gave him every advantage. I'd fought for 3 years and lost everything. This time would be different. This time, I wanted him to take the kids. Because this time, I was ready. The preparation took months. I consulted with international family law attorneys in 5 different countries. I learned about the Hague Convention on International Child Abduction, about Interpol protocols, about how countries cooperated or didn't in parental kidnapping cases. I documented everything about our children's lives in the United States, their schools, their doctors, their routines. I got affidavits from teachers, pediatricians, neighbors. I built a paper trail that proved Emma and Lucas were habitually resident in New York, that I was an involved and loving parent, that there was no legitimate reason for them to be removed from the country. I also gathered evidence of Michael's intent. The emails where he discussed relocating permanently with Jessica, the searches on his computer for international schools and long-term housing, the conversations with his cousin about job opportunities, the financial transfers to Singapore banks. I had proof that this wasn't a vacation. This was a kidnapping. Then I did something that would have been impossible in my first life. I went to the authorities before he left. I met with an FBI agent who specialized in international parental abduction. I showed her everything. The evidence of planning, the financial transfers, the affair, Michael's pattern of deception. I explained that I believed he was going to take our children to Singapore and not return. "Why don't you just refuse to let him take them?" she asked. "Because I need him to commit the crime," I said. "I need it to be clear and unambiguous. I need there to be no question that he's a fugitive, that he's violated international law. Because if I stop him now, he'll try again later. And next time, I might not see it coming." She studied me for a long moment. "You understand that this is a risk? That once he leaves the country, there's a chance we might not get them back?" "I understand," I said, "but I have confidence in the system." I didn't, really. The system had failed me spectacularly in my first life. But this time, I had something I hadn't had before. Knowledge, preparation, and evidence that even the most corrupt judge couldn't ignore. The agent agreed to monitor the situation. I filed a preemptive request for an emergency custody order with the family court to be executed the moment Michael failed to return the children on schedule. I contacted Interpol and the Singapore authorities, providing them with evidence of Michael's intent to abscond with the children. And then I waited. Michael approached me in May, exactly as I knew he would. "I've been thinking about that Singapore trip," he said. "My cousin says July would be perfect. School's out, the weather is decent. I could take Emma and Lucas for 2 weeks." 2 weeks? I frowned. That seems like a long time. "It's a 20-hour flight each way," he said impatiently. "We need at least 10 days to make it worthwhile." "I suppose that makes sense." I bit my lip, playing the uncertain wife. "But I'll miss them so much." "You have your trial," he said. "You'll barely notice they're gone." I let him see me hesitate. Let him think he was convincing me. "Okay," I said finally, "but you have to promise to video call every day." "Of course," he lied. I helped him book the flights. I helped him pack the kids' bags. I took Emma and Lucas to get their hair cut and bought them new clothes for the trip. I acted like the devoted mother sending her children off on a wonderful adventure with their father. And the night before they left, I made copies of their passports, their tickets, their entire itinerary. I documented the conversation where Michael promised to return them on July 18th. I recorded him telling the kids that they were going to maybe stay a little longer if you really like it there. Emma, 9 years old now and smart as a whip, looked uncertain. "But what about Mom?" "Mom has work," Michael said smoothly. "She's very busy with her career, but we'll have an amazing time, I promise." I hugged them at the airport, breathing in the smell of Emma's strawberry shampoo and Lucas's little boy's sweat. Emma clung to me and I whispered in her ear, "I love you so much. I'll see you very soon." "Promise?" she asked. "Promise," I said. I watched them walk through security, Lucas bouncing with excitement, Emma looking back at me with worried eyes, Michael not looking back at all. He thought he'd won. He thought I was standing there heartbroken and helpless, watching my children disappear. He had no idea I was counting down the hours until his arrest. The first day passed normally. Michael sent a few photos from the plane, from the Singapore airport, from his cousin's apartment. The kids looked happy, if tired. I responded with heart emojis and encouraging messages. The second day, he stopped responding to my requests for video calls. "They're busy," he texted, "having too much fun to talk." The third day, he missed our scheduled call entirely. The fourth day, I got an email from an attorney in Singapore. Michael was filing for emergency custody, claiming that I was an unfit mother who had been neglecting the children. He was requesting that Emma and Lucas be allowed to remain in Singapore pending a full custody hearing. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, to the FBI agent, and to the family court judge who was already holding a signed emergency custody order. "He's made his move," I told my attorney. "Execute the order." What happened next was beautiful. The emergency custody order went into effect immediately, declaring that Michael had no legal right to retain the children in Singapore. The FBI contacted Interpol, who contacted Singapore authorities. An arrest warrant was issued for international parental kidnapping, a federal crime that carried a 3-year prison sentence. But it got better, because while I'd been building the custody case, I'd also been feeding evidence of Michael's financial crimes to the SEC and the New York State Bar Association. The creative accounting at Chen and Associates, the misappropriated client funds, the shell corporations used to hide income, all of it documented, time-stamped, and delivered to the proper authorities. The same day Interpol issued the warrant for parental kidnapping, the SEC announced an investigation into Chen and Associates for securities fraud. The Bar Association suspended Michael's license pending an ethics review, and the FBI began looking into Eleanor Chen's role in the scheme. Michael found out when Singapore police showed up at his cousin's apartment. I know because Emma called me, sobbing. "Mommy, the police are here. They're saying Daddy did something wrong. They want to take us somewhere." "It's okay, baby," I said, my heart breaking at the fear in her voice. "The police are there to help. They're going to bring you home to me. Everything is going to be okay." "Promise?" "I promise." Singapore authorities detained Michael pending extradition. Emma and Lucas were placed in the temporary custody of the U.S. consulate and were on a flight back to New York within 24 hours. I was waiting at the airport when they arrived, along with my attorney, a child psychologist, and a representative from Child Protective Services, all there to document that I was a fit, loving parent who had done everything right. Emma ran into my arms and didn't let go for an hour. Lucas, only 6 years old, didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew something was wrong. He cried because Emma was crying, and I held them both and whispered that they were safe. They were home. They were never leaving again. Michael wasn't so lucky. The extradition took 3 months. Michael fought it, of course, using what was left of his mother's money to hire Singaporean lawyers who argued that this was a civil custody dispute, not a criminal matter. But the evidence was overwhelming. He'd taken the children with clear intent not to return them. He'd filed for custody in a foreign jurisdiction, while there was an active case in New York. He'd violated the Hague Convention and multiple federal laws. Singapore ultimately ruled that he would be extradited to face charges. He arrived back in New York in shackles. Eleanor tried to bail him out, but the prosecution argued, successfully, that he was a flight risk. He'd already fled the country with children once. Who was to say he wouldn't do it again? The judge agreed. Michael was remanded to custody pending trial. I watched from the gallery as they led him away. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw the exact moment he understood. His face went white. His mouth opened. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw a stranger. "You did this," he mouthed. I smiled. The custody hearing was almost anticlimactic. My attorney presented evidence of Michael's planning, his deception, his intent to permanently remove the children from my life. She presented the documentation of his affair, his financial crimes, his pattern of manipulation. Michael's attorney tried to argue that I'd been an unfit mother, that I'd been unstable and emotionally volatile. But I had 3 years of therapy records showing a stable, engaged patient. I had statements from teachers, doctors, neighbors. I had videos of birthday parties, school plays, weekend outings. I had proof that I had been present and loving and devoted. And Michael had nothing except a rap sheet that was growing by the day. The judge granted me full legal and physical custody. Michael was allowed supervised visitation, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Eleanor's request for grandparent visitation was denied. I took my children home and told them they would never have to leave me again. The criminal trial took another year. During that time, the case against Chen and associates expanded like a cancer. The SEC discovered millions in misappropriated client funds. The investigation revealed that Eleanor had been running a Ponzi scheme for decades, using new client money to pay old obligations, keeping the whole thing afloat through sheer force of personality and social connections. When it all came crashing down, it was spectacular. Chen and Associates was dissolved. Eleanor was indicted on 43 counts of fraud. Michael's cousin in Singapore was arrested as an accomplice, having helped hide assets overseas. Jessica, who had been named in several of the financial transactions, flipped on everyone to save herself and testified for the prosecution. The affair that was supposed to set Michael free had instead sealed his fate. Michael's trial for international parental kidnapping came first. The prosecution was ruthless. They showed the jury emails where Michael discussed starting fresh in Singapore with Jessica. They played recordings of him telling the children that they might not go back to America. They brought in expert witnesses who explained how parental kidnapping traumatizes children, how it destroys their sense of safety and trust. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay $500,000 in restitution for the costs of recovering the children, money he didn't have since his assets had been frozen in the fraud investigation. Eleanor's trial came 6 months later. I attended every day, sitting in the front row where she could see me. She'd gotten old, I noticed. The stress had carved new lines into her face, turned her hair fully gray. She wouldn't look at me. The evidence against her was damning. 40 years of fraud, of stealing from clients who trusted her, of propping up a lifestyle she couldn't afford with other people's money. The prosecutor painted her as a monster of greed and narcissism. The jury agreed. Eleanor Chen, matriarch of one of New York's most prominent legal families, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. She would be 92 before she was eligible for parole. Michael was still in prison when his mother was convicted. I heard he cried when they told him. I didn't feel bad for him. 5 years later, I'm sitting in my office on the 42nd floor of a midtown high-rise. The name on the door reads, Whitmore Family Law Associates. Whitmore is my maiden name, the one I took back after the divorce was finalized. We specialize in high-conflict custody cases, international parental abduction, and protecting victims of financial abuse. We're very, very good. Emma is 14 now, sharp and brilliant, and planning to be a prosecutor when she grows up. To put away people like Dad, she says, and I don't discourage her. Lucas is 12, sweet and gentle, and nothing like his father. He wants to be a teacher, and I think he'll be wonderful at it. They see Michael once a month, supervised visits at a facility designed for incarcerated parents. Emma goes out of obligation. Lucas goes because he still loves his father, even though he doesn't understand what he did. I don't force either of them. I learned in therapy, real therapy, not the performance I put on during my divorce planning, that children need to make their own choices about complicated relationships. Michael will be released in 6 months. He'll be on supervised release for another 4.5 years after that, during which time he's forbidden from leaving the state without permission. He'll also be disbarred, unemployable in any field that requires trust or financial access, and perpetually under the shadow of his crimes. Eleanor will die in prison. Her appeals have all been exhausted. Her fortune is gone, seized by the government to repay her victims. The Chen name is mud, and me, I'm free. I'm free in a way I never was in my first life because this time, I didn't just survive. I won. I won so completely that there's no question, no ambiguity, no room for doubt about who was the villain and who was the victim. I don't tell Emma and Lucas about the rebirth. How can I? How can I explain that I died alone and broken and was given a second chance? That I used that chance not just to save myself, but to destroy the people who destroyed me? They wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed in the beautiful brownstone I bought with my own money, I think about that hospital room, that empty, bleach-scented room where I died unloved and unmourned. And I think about how I would do it all again, every manipulation, Every calculated tear, every moment of pretending to be weak while I sharpened my knives. Because Michael and Eleanor didn't just hurt me, they tried to erase me. They tried to take my children and my dignity and my future and leave me with nothing but debt and despair. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. I pour myself a glass of wine, expensive wine, the kind Eleanor used to serve at her charity dinners, and I toast to the woman I was and the woman I became, to second chances and to revenge, to the look on Michael's face when he realized I'd beaten him at his own game. It's the sweetest victory I've ever known. The knock on my office door comes on a Thursday afternoon. I'm reviewing case files for a new client. Another woman whose ex is trying to take her children overseas. Another woman I'm going to help save. When my assistant says I have a visitor. I don't have any appointments scheduled, I say. She says she's from the federal prosecutor's office. I feel a flicker of unease, but I push it down. I haven't done anything illegal. Unethical, maybe by the standards of perfect honesty. But not illegal. The woman who enters is in her 50s, steel gray hair cut in a severe bob, a suit that costs more than most people's monthly rent. She looks like she eats defense attorneys for breakfast. Miss Whitmore, she says, extending her hand. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Morrison. Do you have a few minutes? Of course. I gesture to the chair across from my desk. What can I do for you? She sits, crosses her legs, studies me with eyes that miss nothing. I'm here about the Chen case, your ex-husband's case. My heart rate picks up, but I keep my face neutral. Michael was convicted 5 years ago. What about it? We've been conducting a review of certain irregularities in the case. Nothing that affects the conviction, she adds quickly. Your ex-husband is guilty, no question. But there are some timing issues that have caught our attention. I'm not sure I understand. You filed multiple reports with various agencies, the FBI, Interpol, the SEC, the Bar Association, all within a very narrow window. And you had evidence that was remarkably comprehensive, almost as if you'd been building it for years. I was building it for years, I say calmly. I'm a lawyer. Documentation is what we do. True. She smiles slightly. But the timing is interesting. You contacted the FBI about potential parental abduction 3 weeks before your ex-husband even proposed the trip to Singapore. You provided evidence of financial crimes that you couldn't possibly have known about unless you'd been actively investigating your husband. I suspected he was having an affair, I say. When you suspect infidelity, you start noticing other irregularities. Is that what happened? She leans forward. Or did you know exactly what he was planning because you'd seen him do it before? The room goes very cold. I'm sorry, I say carefully. Are you suggesting I'm psychic? I'm suggesting, she says, that you played a very long game, that you knew exactly what your ex-husband would do, exactly when he would do it, and you prepared for it with extraordinary precision, the kind of precision that only comes from experience. I say nothing. My mind is racing, calculating. How much does she know? How much can she prove? I've been a prosecutor for 27 years, Morrison continues. I've seen a lot of cases, but I've never seen anyone orchestrate an outcome quite like you did. It was almost surgical. Every piece of evidence perfectly timed, perfectly placed, every authority notified at exactly the right moment. You didn't just catch your ex-husband. You destroyed him. He destroyed himself, I say. I just documented it. Did you? She tilts her head. Or did you let him hang himself with rope you carefully provided? I meet her eyes. If a man is determined to commit a crime, is it wrong to make sure he faces consequences? That depends on how much you manipulated the situation. She pulls out a folder, sets it on my desk. I've been going through the timeline. You started moving assets into separate accounts 18 months before the abduction. You began documenting his activities 2 years before. You consulted with international law experts long before there was any indication he was planning to leave the country. I'm a cautious person. You're a person who knew exactly what was going to happen. She taps the folder. A person who might have had knowledge of future events. The silence stretches between us. I can feel my pulse in my throat. That's impossible, I say finally. I know it's impossible. Morrison sits back. Which is why I'm not here in an official capacity. There's no law against being extremely well prepared. There's no crime in predicting your ex-husband's behavior with uncanny accuracy. And even if there were, I couldn't prove it. Then why are you here? She studies me for a long moment. Because I have a daughter, she says quietly. She's in a marriage that's troubled. Her husband is controlling, financially abusive. He's started talking about moving to his home country, taking their children with him. She's terrified, but she doesn't know how to stop him. Understanding dawns. I see. I've spent my career putting criminals away, Morrison says. I believe in the law, in the system. But I also know that sometimes the system fails women. It fails mothers. It lets men like your ex-husband take everything and leave their victims with nothing. She stands, smooths her skirt. Your firm has an excellent reputation for handling complex custody cases, particularly international parental abduction. We do. If my daughter were to contact you, would you take her case? I think about that hospital room. I think about dying alone. I think about every woman who has ever been where I was, who has ever felt powerless and small and erased. Yes, I say, I would take her case, and I would make sure she wins. Morrison nods slowly. That's what I thought. She pauses at the door. What you did to Michael Chen and his mother, it was justice. Not legal justice, maybe, but justice nonetheless. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. She smiles, and it's almost warm. Whatever advantage you had, whatever edge, use it well. There are a lot of women who need someone like you. She leaves. I sit at my desk, staring at the space where she'd been, my mind churning. She knows. Somehow, impossibly she knows, but she's not going to do anything about it. My phone buzzes. A new client inquiry forwarded from my assistant. A woman named Sarah Morrison, asking about representation in an international custody dispute. I read the intake form, and I see myself. I see every woman who has ever been gaslit, manipulated, financially abused. Every mother who has watched her children slip away while the system tells her she's too emotional, too unstable, too weak to fight back. I open a new case file, and I begin to plan. 10 years after the rebirth, I'm standing in a congressional hearing room. I've been invited to testify about gaps in international family law, about how the system fails to protect children from parental abduction, about how we can do better. Emma is in the audience. She's 19 now, a sophomore at Columbia, majoring in criminal justice. Lucas is 17, applying to colleges, still sweet and gentle, and determined to make the world better. They don't know I'm doing this for them. For the children I saved and the children I couldn't save in my first life. Miss Whitmore, the senator says, you've become one of the nation's leading experts on international parental abduction. Your firm has successfully recovered over 200 children from around the world. What would you say is the key to your success? I think about Michael rotting in prison, Eleanor dying behind bars, Jessica who lost everything when she testified against them. The empire that crumbled because I knew exactly where to strike. Preparation, I say, and the willingness to use every legal tool at your disposal. These cases are complicated, but they're not impossible. If you know what you're looking for, if you document everything, if you build an airtight case, you can win. And what about cases where mothers don't see the signs in time, where they don't know what their husbands are planning? I smile. That's why we need better education, better resources. Women need to know what parental abduction looks like before it happens. They need to know the warning signs, the patterns of behavior. They need to be prepared. Because I know all about being unprepared. I know about missing the signs. I know about learning too late. But I also know about second chances. After the hearing, Emma finds me in the hall. She hugs me tight, and I smell the same strawberry shampoo she's used since she was a little girl. You were amazing, Mom, she says. I'm so proud of you. Thank you, sweetheart. I want to be like you when I graduate, she says. I want to help people the way you do. I pull back, look at her face. So young, so fierce, so full of righteous determination. And I see the woman she'll become. The prosecutor who won't let guilty men walk free. The advocate who will fight for women who can't fight for themselves. I see the legacy of my second life. You'll be better than me, I say. You'll change the system. You won't have to work around it. Maybe, she grins. But I learned from the best. We walk out of the building together into the bright spring sunshine. Lucas is waiting outside and he wraps me in a hug that lifts me off my feet. He's taller than me now, strong and healthy and whole. My children. My beautiful, perfect children, who don't remember the fear in their eyes when the Singapore police came. Who don't know that in another life they grew up calling another woman mom and forgot that I existed. They're here, they're safe, they're mine. And Michael, wherever he is, whatever he's doing now that he's out of prison, will never touch them again. We get dinner at our favorite restaurant, the three of us, and I listen to Emma talk about her classes and Lucas talk about his college applications. They're happy, they're thriving. They're everything I died for and was reborn to save. That night, alone in my brownstone, I open my laptop and check my secure email. There's a message from another attorney in another state asking for advice on a case. A mother whose ex-husband is planning to take their children to Brazil. She doesn't have much evidence yet, but she has suspicions, and she wants to know how to build a case. I write back with detailed instructions, documentation to gather, authorities to contact, legal strategies to employ. I give her everything I wish someone had given me in my first life. And then I open my private files, the ones encrypted 6 ways from Sunday, the ones that exist only in this computer in this room, and I add another entry to my journal. Case hash 247. Mother, Jennifer Wallace. Father, Robert Wallace. Destination, Brazil. Likelihood of abduction, 85%. Recommended action, preemptive custody motion, Interpol notification, asset freeze. I have dozens of these cases going at any given time. Women who reach out to me, women I reach out to, women I find through my network of attorneys and advocates and survivors. I help them all one way or another because I remember dying alone in a hospital room with nothing. And I will never, ever let that happen to another woman if I can prevent it. The cursor blinks at me, waiting. I add one more line. Status, in progress. Victory likely, justice certain. I close the laptop and pour myself that expensive wine. And to second chances, to the women who fight back, to revenge that tastes like justice and justice that tastes like revenge. And to Michael Chen, who thought he could destroy me and learned far too late that some women are unkillable. Some of us come back stronger, some of us come back ready for war, and some of us win so completely that our enemies spend the rest of their lives wondering what the hell happened. I drink my wine and smile because I know exactly what happened. I happened.